Hello, in this video I'm going to be talking about a journal article by Christine Korsgaard called Creating the Kingdom of Ends, Reciprocity and Responsibility in Personal Relations. So Christine Korsgaard has a book, a 1996 book called Creating the Kingdom of Ends. I like this journal article, which I think is from 1992, and I use it in my ethics classes a good bit. Part of the reason why I use it is because students seem to have a hard time, and I myself have a hard time understanding exactly what Kant means by the kingdom of ends. And so I think Korsgaard's article gives us a nice way of thinking through the kingdom of ends using the concept of reciprocity. And she brings Aristotle and Kant together in some interesting ways. And one of my favorite things to teach in ethics, and I find students respond to it really well, is the friendship stuff from the Nicomachean Ethics. So that friendship stuff in Aristotle comes together with Kant in the Kingdom of Ends. And this is a digestible journal article instead of putting another book on the syllabus or something like that. So just jump right in. Again, this is the journal article from Philosophical Perspectives, Creating the Kingdom of Ends, Reciprocity and Responsibility in Personal Relations by Christine Korsgaard. Notice from the title, she makes a distinction at the very beginning between legal responsibility, or responsibility in the context of law, versus in the context of personal relations. So in the article, she sets aside those problems of legal responsibility and focuses in on responsibility in our personal relationships. So she says she's going to offer an account of personal relations derived from Kant and Aristotle with an explanation of why they require us to hold one another responsible. So this is going to be a requirement of personal relations, that we are able to hold one another responsible. Distinguish two views about what holding someone responsible involves. And that specifically will entail holding someone responsible is to adopt an attitude towards him rather than to have a belief about him or about the conditions under which he acts. So this idea of the attitude will become very important. And then her view, she admits, gives rise to a problem. If holding someone responsible is something we do, why and how do we decide to do it? And so that will entail the rest of the paper. So at the beginning, she distinguishes from the sort of British imperial tradition her view of why we hold someone responsible. She cites Hutcheson, Hume, and Smith, and for them, it's the approval or the disapproval of others that lies at the basis of moral phenomenon, right? So it's the fact that other people either approve or disapprove. So you have a strong emphasis on sort of social norms that are out there. Now, one of the things that Korsgaard does not like about this so much is that responsibility then becomes something assigned to you externally. So some external force or social factor assigns to you responsibility, and you don't have a formative role in it. However, what she likes about Kant, she says, in Kant, moral thought is seen to arise from the perspective of the agent who is deciding what to do. Responsibility is, in the first instance, something taken rather than something assigned. So she likes this idea that I take responsibility, and that responsibility arises out of my action, right? It arises out of my perspective on what it is I am doing, what I have decided to do, as she says. So we want to think through this side of the contrast that Korsgaard has painted, that responsibility is something that we take rather than something that is assigned. Now, she acknowledges that, according to Kant's metaphysical views, we don't always know our own sort of deep-seated fundamental axioms, right? And he combines this with these moral injunctions to respect others and so on and so forth. But we can't avoid holding each other responsible in our personal relationships. So on the one hand, Kant gives us a kind of philosophical view that suggests the biblical judge not. That's what Korsgaard indicates, that this refraining from judgment comes out of a generous moral attitude in Kant. Because, again, of these epistemological problems, I might not know what my own deepest maxims are, whether or not I have a good will. Since that is somewhat hidden from me, I should be somewhat generous, right? Judge not. But we can't sort of help but judge and to hold each other responsible. Holding one another responsible is the distinctive element in the relation of adult human beings. To hold someone responsible is to regard her as a person, that is to say, as a free and equal person, capable of acting both rationally and morally. It is therefore to regard her as someone with whom you can enter the kind of relation that is possible only among free and equal rational people, a relation of reciprocity. This is exactly why she wants to turn to friendship. So if you're interested particularly in Aristotle's view of friendship, I have another video, a short video about that, where you can walk through what Aristotle has to say in the particular sections of the Nicomachean Ethics that Korsgaard is citing here. So I'll put a link to that in the details of this video if you want to explore that more. But reciprocity is very important, and true friends have to be able to reciprocate in equitable ways with one another. So this idea of equality, where we consider each other as equals and as partners in friendship and so on. There, you're prepared to accept promises, offer confidence, exchange vows, cooperate, and so on and so on. You have an expectation that each other has a respectful view of one another, that I take you seriously as a person and I respect your wishes, and that I will consider your words and your point of view and your plan, you know. So she finds, so I've been focusing a bit on Aristotle there, but she says both Kant and Aristotle have this idea of reciprocity. And she spends several very interesting chapters doing just some good comparative scholarship, bouncing Kant and Aristotle off of each other in order to draw out this idea of reciprocity that she is interested in. And so there's really good, I think, scholarly work on the next pages that just, again, shows the idea of reciprocity that she's trying to pull from Aristotle and Kant combined. Here, I think an interesting point, or an important point she makes, is that while love moves you to pursue the ends of another, respect reminds you that she must determine what those ends are. While love moves you to care for the happiness of another, respect demands that you care for her character too. And Kant is talking about the feelings of love and respect, because he's defining the friendship of sentiment, but this does not sever the tie from morality for Kant, right? So, again, your love of the person is moving or motivate you to pursue their ends, while the respect is demanding that you care for their character. So you don't want to help them pursue happiness in a way that's going to be detrimental to their character, right? You want to help them pursue their ends, but you only want to help them where those ends will be conducive to their character. Because friends, part of the idea of friendship that Korsgaard is working around is that friends want the best for one another, right? That we want to try to make each other better and to help perfect our moral characters. this is why she started with this sort of epigraph from Aristotle. As the virtuous man is to himself, he is to his friend also, for his friend is another self. So that important assumption of mutual respect that occurs between friends, that you are looking out for each other, you have each other's back, and so on and so forth. On the one hand, your love of your friend is motivating you to help them pursue their ends, while your respect for them is helping you to look out for their character, helping you safeguard their character, just as you would be interested in safeguarding your own character. So you can see she basically says that this kind of friendship that Kant is talking about is analogous to Aristotle's virtuous friendship, the perfected form of friendship that you find in Aristotle. For Aristotle, justice is, at its best, a kind of civic friendship. And indeed, friendship, like justice, is not primarily a character of doing things for one another, but of doing things together. And she thinks Kant would agree. This is her summary of the role that justice plays in friendship for Aristotle, and she would say Kant would agree. Kant thinks that justice is reciprocal coercion under a general will, made necessary by geographical and economic association. But in personal relationships, you don't carry on a personal relationship just because of where you happen to live, or where, because of the geographic necessity. No, you invest in people and you work and you choose friends and that kind of thing. So in your personal relationships, it's not that narrow sense of politics where you're doing things together just because you happen to have to live in the same area and that kind of thing. Here's where she elaborates some on the kingdom of ends for the first time. To join with others as citizens in the kingdom of ends is to extend our inner attitudes and personal choices, the kind of reciprocity that characterizes our outer actions in the political state. You, on the one hand, treat another as an end in themselves. So that means to make her ends your own. However, there's a negative sense where you treat another as an end in themselves by respecting their autonomy, to leave their actions and decisions up to them. It's their own choice. What really draws this out most clearly, Korsgaard thinks, is that when we're called upon to act together, that is why friendship touches the political sense of justice earlier. Friends coordinate their efforts and work together. They act together to do things. And they act to achieve goals that everybody is sharing. So we all have the same sort of goal amongst friends. And one of the roles that reciprocity is playing there is there's a mutual respect and a give and take between us in order to work together to achieve those goals. Without that reciprocal respect and love for one another, we wouldn't be able to coordinate in the way that we do among friends. One of the basic things that she means by reciprocity here is just the way in which friends generally are safe to assume that you can be truthful with one another. That my friend is being truthful with me, and they can assume that I'm being truthful with them. Which is why when a friend lies to you, it feels like a betrayal, because you're working under the tacit or implicit assumption that they're being honest with me most of the time, for the most part. And because we have mutual respect, right? So that kind of reciprocity is what Korsgaard is driving at throughout this essay. The point that she wants to make is that moral and personal relations are not different in kind. The difference between them is the difference between degree of reciprocity that is required of us as one human being relating to another, and the degree of reciprocity that we are capable of when our relations are at their best. Anyone must tell the truth when the circumstances call for it, but between friends there is a presumption of intimacy, frankness, and confidence. Anyone must help another in need or emergency, but friends promote each other's projects as routinely as they do their own. So she just gives a couple examples in order to draw out what she means by the degree here. That moral relations are more general, and they require the kind of respect and reciprocity that she's talking about, again, in a general way. Personal relationships are a degree more intense, right? It's a level of intensity higher, that you presume and you pursue these goals more as if they're your own. Again, that line that she gave us from Aristotle, that your friend is another self. It's a pretty famous quote from Aristotle there. In this sense, right, because the degree of the requirement is so higher, Korsgaard viewed friendship as a moral achievement, right? Friendships are human moral achievements that are lovely in themselves and testify to the virtue of those who sustain them. To become friends is to create a neighborhood where the kingdom of ends is real. It's a very interesting, I think, viewpoint, right? Because everybody is sharing their ends mutually together as friends and legislating rules for each other and so on and so forth. Because we're all pursuing our ends. I've adapted your ends as mine and this and that. You've adapted mine, so on and so forth. The section that follows here is very interesting, and it clarifies a few issues regarding not just the kingdom of ends, but also the principle of humanity, where we're never supposed to use people as means, right? We have to treat them as always as ends in themselves and never as means. The point here is about sexual relations, that we can easily see Kant might have some issue with sexual relations insofar as we use each other for pleasure as a means to pleasure. That is not quite the point, actually, with this problem of regarding someone as a sexual object. So Korsgaard, I think, has a very nuanced view of this. So it is important to understand that what bothers Kant is not the idea that one is using another person as a means to one's own pleasure. That's not what Kant views the problem. What bothers Kant is rather that sexual desire takes a person for its object. So regarding someone as a sexual object is not like regarding him as an instrument, but more like regarding him as an aesthetic object. But in this case, the attitude is not just appreciation, but desire. What's interesting is the way that reciprocity gets us out of this problem in Kant, right? So what happens in a moral sexual relationship, and this particular example, I think, is going to be generalized. So we'll talk about the generalization of this movement, a movement of self-retrieval. We'll talk about that as we move on. So what happens is I surrender my ends wholly to another person. But they also surrender their ends wholly to me, such that we unite our wills together. The reason why the idea of self-retrieval comes up is if I surrender my will to the other, and they in turn surrender to me, they give me back to myself, right? If I surrender my will to them, and they take possession of my will, and they're holding my will, so to speak, and then they surrender to me, because my will has become a part of them, they give my will back to me. And vice versa. This is how our wills become united, because they've done the same thing. They've surrendered their will to me, and I've, again, mutually, reciprocally back to them, and so I've given their will back to them, and so on. And we've formed one will, unity of the will. What really makes this significant is the relations of reciprocity are relations that obtain between free and equal persons. So you have to be able to surrender and accept and be reciprocal in this way. But they're relations that obtain between free and equal persons. As such, they call for mutual responsibility for two important reasons. In order to make the ends and reasons of another your own, you must regard her as a source of value, someone whose choices confer worth upon their objects and who has the right to decide on her own actions. In order to entrust your own ends and reasons to another's care, you must suppose that she regards you in that way and is prepared to act accordingly. So again, it has to go both ways. You have to regard them as a source of value, someone whose choices confer worth upon objects and so on, and they have to be able to think of you that way. You have to trust that they see you that way. The element of trust is really important because, again, you don't have access to their first personal point of view. You don't know exactly how it is that they're apprehending you, but you're entrusting that they apprehend you also as a source of value and that kind of thing. Right? So she doesn't want to focus on an exchange of benefits and harms, right? When we talk about reciprocity in this way, we risk like sliding into that language of just exchange, like as if trust and love and those sorts of concepts are tokens that we can trade back and forth. Like I give you love and you give me, and then we have little love coins that we carry around in our personal relationship purse or something like that, right? So she doesn't want to think about it in that way. She wants to avoid that conceptual problem. Focus less upon the exchange of benefits and harms and the feelings that result from the exchange, and more upon the willingness to act in concert. So she's interested in this cooperative element, the willingness to act in concert together, rather than what is being circulated, the exchange of feeling and all that kind of stuff. No, the willingness to act together. Here's where why she's into Kant, right? Why choose Kant and Aristotle? The willingness, that's what she's interested in. I'm going to stop there at the end of that first section, and we will pick up in another video on section 2 on the theoretical and practical conceptions of responsibility. So again, the overall point to take from this first section is friendship is a moral relationship, and perhaps a foundational moral relationship, that demands higher levels of moral commitment than the general ethical relationships that we have in our lives. And that we need to have this reciprocity of love and respect, whereby we can adapt other people's ends as our own, and we will entrust that they will adapt ours, and that we're working together for a shared set of ends. And that there's this tacit and implicit agreement and trust between us, such that we are willing to work together, again, to achieve this kingdom of ends, as Korsgaard puts it. Okay? So I'll leave us there, and then I will pick up with section 2 in another video. Thanks.